Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Objective. Today I'm here with Daniel. So, today we're talking about a plan which was announced by Joe Biden in the speech he gave recently. And what is strange about this is he announced what seems to be a plan to end the war in Gaza. Now, there's a fair bit of confusion about this and things which don't make sense, which we're going to discuss and do our best to parse out and make some sense of. But I think ultimately what you guys are going to see is there's not much sense to be made. So fundamentally, this is a plan of three phases, as Biden announced it. And this is a plan which is going to see the end of the war, the return of the hostages, and the continuation of Hamas in power in Gaza. So supposedly in phase one of the war, it's not dated when of the phase, excuse me, in phase one, which isn't dated. We don't know when this is going to happen, presumably sometime after Hamas assents to this. There's going to be a 6-week ceasefire. Israeli troops are going to withdraw from Gaza, and the hostages are going to be swapped. Any remaining living hostages are going to be swapped for Palestinian prisoners, which is held by Israel. No definite number of the
Well,
amount of.
let
Yeah.
me correct you because I think you got some stuff wrong. So we have also the Biden when he talked about this. So I think we'll watch this later. But first, I want to kind of discuss just the confusion. And
Okay.
just saying this beforehand, we are probably gonna have another episode on this because again, if this get accepted, this is like the deal. But basically, so in phase one, as Morgan said, a potential 6-week ceasefire, withdrawal of IDF not from Gaza but from major cities, which I think
Okay.
mainly means Rafah, release of some hostages, Palestinians can return to their homes. This is how Biden has stated it, and also surge in humanitarian aid. Then, during this 6-week ceasefire, there's supposed to be a negotiation between Israel and Hamas about these points: a permanent ceasefire, a complete IDF withdrawal, and a hostage prisoner swap. And then in phase three, it's basically just a reconstruction of Gaza and a final remains of hostages being returned. So what's weird about this, as Morgan stated, this is an Israeli plan. Basically, Israel had proposed this plan, and Biden is going with it because, I mean, it just seems like, yeah, for him, this seems like a really good plan. What's weird about this is as soon as Biden has made a speech about basically introducing this plan to the American public, the Prime Minister's office, the Twitter, has issued a statement saying there will not be an end to the war without Israel's objectives achieved. Israel's conditions for ending the war have not changed: the destruction of Hamas military and governing capabilities, and the freeing of all hostages, and ensuring that Gaza no longer poses a threat to Israel. Now, these two things don't make sense together. You cannot completely destroy Hamas military and governing capabilities and then have a negotiating partner to sort of negotiate a permanent ceasefire. So this is, I think, like the first confusion that comes in. Like everybody seems to, I mean, even Hamas has signaled that they would accept this plan. But again, from all of these points don't really make sense together. So Morgan, do you want to bring in anything now?
Yeah. Well, so a statement from senior Hamas officials have said that they welcome this. And yet, if it were actually included in the plan that Hamas is going to be destroyed, it doesn't make sense that they would welcome this. And also, so the statement from Netanyahu's office, as you say, is saying that Netanyahu approved the negotiating team to propose a plan, and then this has been announced by Biden. Now, the way Biden is speaking about it is not as if Israel has a proviso in the plan that they're going to continue with their military objectives till the destruction of Hamas. He's explicitly speaking about it as the ceasefire is going to come in. It's going to be a permanent ceasefire, after phase one, and Hamas is still going to be in power. So there's no pretense of from Biden's side.
So here is something. I don't. So he does mention Hamas in phase one, but he doesn't really mention it later. But again, like I'm struggling to actually see like what does this mean. So I would just bring in so because originally I thought phase one is like an Israeli proposal, and then Biden put like his plan as the other 2 points as like this negotiation. Which if you take phase one alone, I think this is not too crazy of a Israeli proposal. I mean, we already had one ceasefire. It wasn't 6 weeks, it was 4 days, and it was broken like pretty much minutes in. But it happened, this sort of swap of, again, not a hostage swap, a swap of hostages that were taken on October 7th by Hamas and actual killers and prisoners who tried to kill those people and take them. But this has happened. So the first phase doesn't seem too crazy. So let's say Hamas accepts this. I can imagine then, yeah, there would be some okay, I guess I'll just state my way of like seeing this. I think Israel is just trying to maybe buy time or get some international support. Like, look, we are proposing this like end to the conflict. Biden supports us. We have America behind us. It's about the hostages. We say we wanted to get hostages. It's about the hostages, and we are conceding some things. We will withdraw from Rafah. Which again would make sense because even the previous ceasefire happened when Israel had went in really strongly, at least comparatively. So we saw a deal coming out. What I think they would do is, I don't believe Hamas will ever like adhere to any sort of ceasefire. So what would probably happen is, again, some hostages might get released and some prisoners. Israel might release some prisoners. The ceasefire would be broken pretty fast, and we would pretty much just continue in a similar way as the last, as how last ceasefire went. That, you know, after a couple of days, it just broke through, no negotiations happened, and the war continued. This is the way I see it right now. Because again, I have a couple more things to say, but what do you think?
It might be just politicking, as you're saying, and the Israelis don't expect it to go through. They were stressing on the Prime Minister of Israel's Twitter account that the progression between the phases of the plan was conditional. So presumably meaning, you know, if any kind of thing isn't adhered to strictly by Hamas, then the deal's off. And as you say, the original ceasefire, they broke it almost immediately, although they continued with it, the Israelis. So I don't know how much weight to put behind that idea that it's just politicking, because this seems to be a major development. And what was strange about this, and you know, we were just discussing this before we went live, is not that many people are actually talking about it. There are news sites reporting on it, but there isn't the explosion on Twitter that I was expecting to see from the kind of pro-Israeli people that I
Yeah,
follow.
like I usually go on Twitter just to get some vibes of like just general people of what they think about it. So I search Biden and there's nothing about this. Everything is about his smirk after he learned that Donald Trump got what you call it?
Found guilty. Yeah.
Yeah, found guilty. And then no one on Twitter is talking about this. Even when I search Israel, no one is actually talking about this deal. Even I think when I searched Israel, people were still talking about ICC. So again, it almost seems like we are like the two of us just saw this like Biden speech and no one else. And
I mean, so that the BBC is reporting on it. I saw Al Jazeera, the Arab Monitor, something like that. So there are news sites reporting on this, but this hasn't generated the kind of controversy that I would expect. Now, if this is just politicking, I would guess it's because Netanyahu is suffering a lot of protest and a lack of popularity because from driven by the families of hostages who want them returned, and they're stressing that this plan is to meet the aim of the return of the hostages, but it's not going to compromise on the aim of destroying Hamas. Now, I don't think that actually washes. I think if this plan is really adhered to all the way, then that's exactly what it adheres to. And again, that's clear in the way Biden is speaking about it. And what is disgraceful in the way that Biden is speaking about it, and which means that if this plan is implemented and is followed, I think this is a disaster, a disastrous plan for Israel, and actually means their real defeat in this conflict. Because for Hamas, if this deal is adhered to, and I think this is why they welcomed it, then they've met their war objectives and they've won. Because they don't have a pretense, I think, in this war in their mind of actually destroying Israel. They perpetrate October 7th. They kill as many Israelis as possible. They win a lot of sympathy on the international stage, and they come out with a stalemate, as they've done in all of the times before. Yes, they're meaningfully damaged, but not their fighting force isn't completely devastated. The tunnels network is damaged, but they can do something about that, and so on, right? So they continue to survive. And Biden was saying that the Israelis can rest easy, that they can accept this because they've devastated Hamas's military force and they don't present a threat to you any longer. Now, you presume the same level of damage. This is comparable damage to Hamas, it seems to be, after all of the previous iterations of the conflict, either the little skirmishes in the late 2010s or 2008 or 2014. And yet again, Hamas is able to come back and to continue fighting. So I think that is just a complete rubbish statement from Biden. And I think, to be honest, he has to know that. And this is just for the purposes of either winning support amongst the Arab voters that he needs in those swing states and seeming like he's, really a peace activist on this. So just for the sake of PR and for seeming pretty good because he's got the war to a cessation point. And then the next time it breaks out, well, he's already won the November election. So he doesn't have to care too much about that because he's not going to be running for a third term. That's my best guess about this. And I think it's just disgraceful.
So I have about a 4-minute clip of Biden sort of putting out this plan so we can talk about it more. Just we can talk about just the plan itself with no other ideas behind it or no other like politicking behind it. But as I said, I think we'll talk about this again maybe tomorrow because today's Sabbath, so a lot of Israeli politicians, especially Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, have not commented on this, but I just put a couple of my questions and maybe I can keep them. We might get an answer next time, but basically, yeah, the first question was from the sort of Israel side that said Hamas has to be destroyed, both militarily and sort of as a government. So again, if Hamas is destroyed, which would it would have to happen before the phase 2, maybe even phase 1. But again, then who are you negotiating the permanent ceasefire with? And again, if you are pulling out, who is actually ruling Gaza after that? Because Israel is supposed to completely pull out. So what I'm expecting is that Israel is probably expecting Hamas to just break the ceasefire, and therefore they can just continue fighting and claim that they have done something to negotiate. And again, maybe Israel is just trying to show some willingness to negotiate to get some international support back. And another question I would have is, would Netanyahu's coalition even be able to survive this deal? And again, we have to wait for Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and other people from his government to sort of comment on it to know. Although we already know that Ben-Gvir was against even the last ceasefire that happened, that was just 4 days. So I cannot see him being too willing to support this. But what we've seen is Yair Lapid, the main opposition party, has actually offered support to basically help Netanyahu sort of withstand the pressure from the far right. But again, if let's say he gets the support from Yair Lapid and abandons his sort of like, let's just call them far right allies, again, if Hamas breaks this deal, I think Netanyahu would be screwed because he wouldn't be able to continue without the more right-wing support from the parliament or from the Knesset, but he wouldn't be able to negotiate for peace because Hamas would have broken it and there would be no more negotiations. So again, I don't think we can answer any of these questions yet, but we might get something tomorrow. So anything you want to comment on before we go to Biden's speech?
Just that if this is a kind of gamble from the Israelis where they really would expect the ceasefire to be broken, it's a really high risk gamble, especially now that Biden has, kind of publicly committed himself to this in this speech. I do think it's a major thing for him to have done this. So if there's some way that they think they're going to win back international favor to some degree by showing a willingness to bring things to a close and negotiate, and they're just hoping it's not going to go through, and therefore they can continue with a greater kind of justification because look, we tried, they broke it, it's on them. I mean, I think that's folly because that's not how the international community has approached it before, and it has the real potential to blow up in their face. So, we don't know, but if that is the rationale behind this, it's really risky, and I can only imagine it's going to fail.
Thank you, Bonnie, for your super chat, and also thank you, Jonathan, for your super chat. Now let's go to listen to Netanyahu. Biden. I think we can pause at times just to comment maybe specific phases, or yeah, we'll see. Morgan, let me know if you want to stop.
Sure.
It's time to begin this new stage. For the hostages to come home, for Israel to be secure, for the suffering to stop. It's time for this war to end, for the day after to begin. This new proposal has 3 phases. 3. The first phase would last for 6 weeks. Here's what it would include: a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from all populated areas of Gaza, release of a number of hostages, including women, the elderly, the wounded, in exchange for release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. There are American hostages who would be released at this stage, and we want them home. Additional, some remains of hostages who have been killed would be returned to their families, bringing some degree of closure to that terrible grief. Palestinians, civilians would return to their homes and neighborhoods in all areas of Gaza, including in the north. Humanitarian assistance would surge, with 600 trucks carrying aid into Gaza every single day. With the ceasefire, that aid could be safely and effectively distributed to all who need it. Hundreds of thousands of temporary shelters, including housing units, would be delivered by the international community. All that and more would begin immediately. During the 6 weeks of phase 1, Israel and Hamas would negotiate the necessary arrangements to get to phase 2, which is a permanent end to hostilities. Now, I'll be straight with you. There are a number of details to negotiate to move from phase 1 to phase 2. Israel will want to make sure its interests are protected. But the proposal says if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase 1, the ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue.
Okay, so that was phase 1, and for those who have been paying attention to this war, this isn't that much different from either the Egypt's proposal that I think is maybe a couple months back, a couple of weeks back, or basically from what we've heard so far as like a potential. So again, 6-week ceasefire, withdrawal of IDF from major cities, release of some hostages release. So Hamas would release some hostages, IDF would release some prisoners. With again, probably it would be disproportionate. Last time I think we had 1 hostage for 2 Palestinians. I'm thinking now Biden said hundreds. So I'm expecting it would be maybe, 1 Israeli for 3, 4, 5 Palestinians, and surging humanitarian aid. And again, he said Hamas and Israel would negotiate for a more long-term ceasefire, as well as more swaps and a complete IDF withdrawal. So what do you think about the proposal?
I think it's whistling. I mean, talking about there being a permanent ceasefire. What has changed, to make anyone think that that is possible with Hamas? Because there's no particular grievance, which could even morally or logically lead to October 7th, but which you could even just outside of those provision, that framework, think about as having led to October 7th and having instigated this war outside of Hamas's ideology and of their desire to attack Israel and kill as many Israelis as possible. And that hasn't changed. And so the significance of calling this a permanent ceasefire, again, I think is just for PR. And because that's what the pro-Palestinian side has said that is the only moral thing, the only moral way for this to end. And yet, since Hamas is still committed and will still be committed, even if they were to say otherwise, which I don't think you would actually get, to not using violence to pursue their goals against Israel anymore. You just aren't, that is just not going to happen. That's still in Hamas's nature. And so any pretense that this is permanent is a pretense. It's not real. And so I think it's ridiculous to claim that there is going to be a permanent ceasefire. And saying what is the significance then of saying that this is going to be 6 weeks if it's going to last longer than 6 weeks, provided that negotiations are still going on longer than that? Again, it's just trying to get as much as possible towards this imaginary goal of a permanent ceasefire without actually saying it. Because every other time that this has devolved into a stalemate, there's been a permanent ceasefire. None of these ceasefires had an end date on them after 2014, before October 7th, and so on. So it's a ceasefire that lasts so long as Hamas abides by it, which we have no reason to believe they're going to do. So this is all ridiculous. I know there's going to be lots of people who celebrate this, and yet that is the same deluded perspective that has led to the conflict continuing. And given the prevalence of the outbreaks of the conflict in recent years, should Biden win the next election, he's going to be stood there, in 3 years' time, let's say, talking about this same thing. And I would, if this were to go through and he were to be doing that, I would have to really hope the journalists are stood there or sat there demanding of him, what went wrong? Why were you so stupid and deluded as to believe that's possible? And yet I don't think we'll see anything like that. Nobody is under any illusions that Hamas is an organization that actually desires peace with Israel. And yet that's how everyone is acting. And that's what's so immoral about this.
Bonnie brings up in the chat that to remove troops from all populated areas means unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, not just major centers. So at least, if I can take Biden's word for it, it doesn't seem like it. I think it is meant to be specifically about Rafah, maybe some other major cities, but especially because it's in the phase 2 where it mentions the complete IDF withdrawal. And again, what you have to remember, this is Israeli plan. This is not just Biden's imposing something on Israel. Israel has picked this plan. So I don't think they would have, I think they want the option to basically continue without a major step back. So that's why I don't think they would agree, or they would want like an actual complete withdrawal, even in the phase 1. I think they would want the flexibility of going back. But yeah, so about the specific points, again, as I said, it's nothing really new. We've heard it before. We've talked about it before. I mean, again, this is why Hamas takes hostages, because they know they will be able to negotiate and getting their killers, the people who organize this back. I mean, as I always like to mention, Yahya Sinwar is one of the people who was released in the Gilad Shalit swap, where one IDF soldiers was swapped for more than 1,000 Palestinians, not just like random Palestinians, but terrorists. And as I said, even someone like Yahya Sinwar was among them. So again, any sort of releasing from Israel's side is again going to give out more terrorists. So this can happen again. Which again, this seems to clash with Israel's commitment to basically, preventing October 7th to happen again, which is why they commit to completely destroying Hamas. And yeah, I think other points are pretty much in the same regard. Search and humanitarian aid. I mean, again, this is just going to supply them for more months to come. It's just giving them an actual time to breathe when there is a ceasefire, even short. Well, 6 weeks is no short term. Last one was 4 days, and I think that was 4 days too many. And yeah, and then the fact that this one I think is even more scary, the fact that Palestinians can return to their homes. I mean, this can make sense if the whole deal goes through, but if it doesn't, then again, all the people that have now been evacuated from Rafah by Israel are going to come back, and again, Israel would have the same problem that they had to deal with last time, where everybody was saying, well, all these people are now in Rafah, you cannot go in Rafah. So they did evacuate almost all of the civilians from Rafah, and again, letting all of them now go back, if this deal doesn't go through, Israel will have the same problem. So I think in all these points, Hamas is gaining something. I mean, the purpose of hostages for them is not just to keep them, it is to get their people back. The more ceasefires they can get, the better for them. They can regroup, they can get more power back, and they can strike harder next time. Withdrawal IDF, they're always gonna like that. Palestinians can return to their homes again. They're getting their shields back. They're happy about it. And surge in humanitarian aid. Again, they're gonna, any aid that comes in in the territory that Hamas controls will be almost completely seized by Hamas. Should we continue?
Well, I'd just say, note something that's lacking from any of these provisos. And I know, the Israeli statement is begging to the contrary. But when you normally see the end of a war, and a war that has any pretense of being successful for the just side, it's the proviso of the condition is unconditional surrender. And there is no requirement from Hamas of that. And since there isn't, Hamas is going to continue in power. And the reason why there is, they put those kind of provisions in of unconditional surrender, it's so that it just can't perpetuate and continue itself. And yet that's exactly what has happened in the conflict. That's the reason. I mean, talk about all the ones historically, but just since 2007, why does this continue to break out? Because no one is demanding of Hamas unconditional surrender. And Israel's not putting that forward in this deal. And so this is just a vehicle of staving the conflict off for a few years if it goes through. And then it's going to break out again. Whether they'll be strong enough in recent years to commit another October 7th, I don't know, but an attack on that scale isn't what they always do. They kill fewer amounts of people. They don't have that kind of success, let's call it that, every single time, but the conflict will be perpetuated. And when Rand talks about the sanction of the victim, that it's the good side who gives oxygen and energy to the evil side to continue what it's doing. This is just another example of this, and I can only hope. I was mentioning before that this is the potential to blow up in the Israelis' face. Although I don't want things to go bad for Israel, then the best situation for Israel, or the best result from Israel of this, is that it blows up in their face and they have to continue. Because if this really ends, then this is such a loss for Israel.
Yeah, but again, as I said, the one thing I'm worried about the most is, but I cannot really imagine it. But yeah, Netanyahu sort of accepting the Yair Lapid support and sort of trying to go the more moderate route. But again, when it blows up in his face, I don't think he has anything to fall back on, which is again why I can't really see it happening. Because again, as much as Netanyahu is not strong enough when it comes to finishing this war, I don't think he's like stupid about like how to do politics. I mean, he has been doing it for a while.
I'll just say as well, there's something which I think Biden says before that clip that we played, which is that he knows this deal will be opposed by people who want the war to go on indefinitely. And it is exactly the contrary. The people who are in favor of this deal, whether they appreciate it or not, are the people who want the war to go on indefinitely. This particular war might cease, but the conflict, the actual war that just breaks out every few years, will go on indefinitely, so long as people continue thinking like this and supporting these kind of policies.
So we are technically out of time, but we have about 2 more minutes. Morgan, do you want to do it?
I'm sorry, just say that again, Daniel. I missed what you said.
Do you want to continue? Because we are out of time, but we have about 2
Yeah.
minutes left.
Sure, I can continue.
Right.
On what aspects do you want to talk about in the
Oh,
deal?
we still have 2 minutes of the video. Phase 2, phase 3.
Oh,
and
sure. 2 minutes of that. Sure. Yeah, let's go. Let's continue with Biden.
Negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase one. The ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue. Then phase two, there'll be an exchange for the release of all remaining living hostages, including male soldiers. Israeli forces will withdraw from Gaza. And as long as Hamas lives up to its commitments, a temporary ceasefire would become, in the words of the Israeli proposal, the cessation of hostilities permanently, end of quote. Cessation of hostilities permanently. Finally, in phase three.
So yeah, this is pretty much the phase 2 is just a continuation, releasing all hostages, but again, swapping for prisoners, and yeah, some sort of cessation of all hostilities, some sort of permanent ceasefire. And the complete withdrawal of IDF. But again, this is not something that's has to be agreed on at the start. This is something to be negotiated during the phase 1. So I'm not sure how much new stuff we can say about this one. It's pretty much all the same. Again, Hamas will benefit from all of these. They'll get more of their people back. They'll get this permanent ceasefire they can just break at any time, and they will get international community behind them after breaking it if Israel doesn't act fast enough. And again, they'll get all of the IDF out of Gaza.
Well, I think the notable bit of that little clip is when he says, so long as Hamas lives up to their commitments. And what reason do you have to believe that Hamas is going to live up to their commitments? Maybe because this is in the interest of them, continuing. They'll abide by these terms. But Hamas is not someone that you can negotiate with. They aren't people who will live up to their commitments because they don't have, a shared fundamental basis from which to negotiate with you. They might agree for the sake of realpolitik and advantage, so that they can continue for another few years until they do this again. But if he has any pretense of meaning, they'll abide by their commitments of a permanent ceasefire. It's lunacy. This is just complete rubbish. They have never done that. They never will do that. You have to provide a reason why you think they'll do that, and yet none is given. And that's the point that really has to be one of the main points that has to be really interrogated. You have to interrogate Biden on that, but you have to interrogate the Israelis on that as well. And so, yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, except this is just delusional and is completely against the Israelis' interests.
Yeah, I mean, I think Hamas they have 2 ways to go about this, and I think they will benefit from either. They can accept this deal completely and completely commit to it, but again, just to do another October 7th once they are able to recover. I mean, every time Israel has responded to some Hamas aggression, they were able to recover and then do it again. I don't think there's any reason to believe this wouldn't happen again, or they will take the last ceasefire route of just breaking the ceasefire immediately and just continuing, because Hamas leaders know that the longer this specific conflict, this war goes on, the more international support they get, the more, they just earned the recognition of the Palestinian state by a few European countries. They got more funding into UNRWA. So again, this might be just a new way of how this conflict will now be. As I said, the longer it goes on, the more support Hamas seems to get.
Yes. Well, yeah, given that we know how this gets perpetuated, given that it gets perpetuated by stalemates, this should be the thing. This kind of deal is what to look out for, and it's what people should be really worried about if you really care about Israel. And again, it's a just I don't know what to call it except a disgraceful lie from the Israeli Benjamin Netanyahu's office statement that they are still going to pursue their military objectives of destroying Hamas. The best way you can spin it is that in the first stage they're going to get the hostages back, kind of as you were saying, I guess, and then they're going to hope it doesn't go through because they want to get the hostages back, and then they're just going to go back on it, or hope that Hamas breaks in some way so they have a pretense of continuing it. That's the best possible way to look at this, and yet we don't have really much reason to hope that's really what's going on, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, one thing to remember is that, Netanyahu's government is even getting internal pressures from the Israeli populace, but the main pressure is coming from the people who want the hostages back. So by sort of having this seemingly permanent deal on the table and potentially getting some or even all hostages back, they might be able to, sort of appease that sort of population and be able to continue. But again, he has to appease both two sides of the Israeli society that are complete opposite to each other, and I'm not sure if he can manage that without completely alienating one of them. Should we go to face? Yeah.
No, I was just saying, well, you can't do that. And the desire to try and do that is why you end up in this awful muddle, to put it lightly. And, part of the reason why people who I think are approaching this really seriously from the beginning were saying that Israel has to act as if the hostages are already dead, as terrible as that is because, as you were saying, Hamas gains advantage for negotiating power from having the hostages. And it gets the Israelis to do things like this, as they've shown time and time again that they're willing to engage in. And as awful as the horror the hostages are subject to, we looked at just one of the videos the other day of those young girls being taken. It's unimaginable horror, and I'm not trying to downplay that at all. But the hostages are using, your own desire to protect your people against you, and you have to take, I think, the broader scope and perspective on that, because if this deal is real, it goes through, then it's more Israelis who'll be killed, raped, and taken hostage in future, which will be the result of this, the direct result of this.
So let's go to final phase 3, as stated by Biden.
Cessation of hostilities permanently. Finally, in phase 3, a major reconstruction plan for Gaza would commence, and any final remains of hostages who've been killed would be returned to their families. That's the offer that's now on the table.
So yeah, phase 3 is nothing major, pretty much. It's just a logical conclusion of this, getting more aid into Gaza, despite it already being the most, the part, or at least, I'm not sure if it still is now, but at least used to be the most per capita receiver of international aid. And we've seen what they did with it. So again, this sort of major reconstruction, unless there's some unique way of doing it now, I think would be just for reconstruction of Hamas and bringing them into operational power sooner than even they would hope for. And the final remains of hostages returned, that's dead bodies. I mean, Israel has negotiated for dead bodies in the past. It's
yeah. Well, again, why isn't this in phase 1 when the hostages come back? Why aren't the remains of the hostages who've been killed?
I think the way, at least I understand it, so there are some, I think, so it's like some hostages in phase 1, and I think even some remains. Then in the second, it's all hostages, like all alive. And then in the third one, it's everything that remains, pretty much.
Well, at least my understanding was that all of the hostages were meant to come back in phase one.
Oh,
But okay. But like the point really, why isn't it in phase one, is this is treating Hamas, like a almost like a peer, like you're an equal that you're negotiating with. Yeah, we'll do this swap with you. We're not going to press for too much. You can return the bodies of the people you brutally kidnapped and murdered and defiled at the latter stage.
well, as horrible as it sounds, it's about leverage. If Hamas released all hostages, they have no leverage. So I
No,
think this is, yeah.
I get that, but the point being that this isn't how Israel should conduct itself. And so this is just completely improper, is the point that I make. I appreciate from a kind of, why this is going on perspective. Yeah, I get that. But this is weakness, and this is defeat.
Yeah, so let's, I think we have about a minute left of just, Biden sort of saying his last things. So we'll watch that, comment on it, and we'll wrap up.
And what we've been asking for is what we need. The people of Israel should know they can make this offer without any further risk to their own security because they've devastated Hamas forces over the past 8 months. At this point, Hamas no longer is capable of carrying out another October 7th, which is one of Israel's main objectives in this war, and quite frankly, a righteous one. This is truly a decisive moment. Israel has made their proposal. Hamas says it wants a ceasefire. This deal is an opportunity to prove whether they really mean it. Hamas needs to take the deal. For months, people all over the world have called for a ceasefire. Now it's time to raise your voices and demand that Hamas come to the table, agrees to this deal, and end this war that they began.
So thank you, Guardian, for the whole speech is, I think, like 15 minutes. So they provided a pretty good short of it. So let me start with this. So first, the obvious comment: they've devastated Hamas forces enough. Hamas is no longer capable of carrying October 7. Again, I don't think this makes any sense. You can always rebuild, you can always recover. I don't see why at any point, unless, again, Hamas would completely be eradicated from the area, I don't see, but again, even if it was, even let's say Hamas was eradicated through this deal, we have already seen the Palestinian people will build up. They want to see more aggression towards Israel. They wouldn't stop just because Hamas is no longer in operating capacity. And again, I wouldn't even from Biden's perspective, if Hamas was not able to rebuild, how would they be able to govern? This is also what I don't get. How can you have one without the other? And something he has also said, which I find interesting, and I'm wondering if he's sort of like a genius mind now. He said, this is for Hamas to prove they mean what they said. In the most positive light, you can interpret this as Biden sort of trying to also have a way out. Basically saying, well, I tried to do a deal, and you see Hamas doesn't like it, so we can support Israel now. We can more strongly support Israel now, which would probably be the most like, we are happy about it. That's, pretty smart from his point of view. This is probably the best thing he could do if this is actually it. And the worst case would be that, again, Hamas would accept this, and therefore this would be horrible for Israel. But I think we haven't really talked about sort of Biden's motivations, but I think even Biden sort of benefits from both sides. If this deal falls through, he is someone that negotiated the deal, or at least supported this deal, so he'll get the support for that. And if it falls through, then he can escape any responsibility. I mean, now it's not on him. He pretty much just stamped the proposal.
Like the major thing that he slips in, showing the sticky fingers of all his comms professionals that go hard at work through the night, clearly drafting this speech, is that this is to bring an end to this war, a righteous war, frankly, is what I think I heard him say there. And if this is a righteous war, then you see it through to the end. You don't just stop it in a ceasefire. That isn't what did the Americans want to do that with ISIS? Do they want to see ISIS complete destruction, or the Taliban's, Al Qaeda's, whoever, or would they have listened for a second, really, to someone who said, "Well, hold on,"
yeah,
to someone who said, "You're waging a righteous war, but just stop it there." Stop it there. Now, that don't get me wrong, that it's not as if the Americans have waged war in a completely proper fashion, but I think to anyone listening to that, you should hear, yeah, what you're doing is right. It's good, but stop it there. And it makes just completely no sense. And it's an awful sign of the way in which you're just trying to balance competing interests and not offend too many people and not taking this really seriously. And it's awful.
So again, to give it the most good faith interpretation, I think you could make a case like it's enough if the opposing party is no longer able to basically oppose you. An example of this would probably keeping the Japanese emperor in power even after after the war ended, as if he's no longer the threat really. So I could see like a best way interpretation of that. But again, I don't see any guarantee that Hamas wouldn't just do this again. If this deal falls through, nothing has fundamentally changed. UNRWA is still educating children to basically, teach them how to kill Jews, and that Palestine has to be reformed or has to be made from river to the sea. Hamas, I mean, this doesn't even mention anything about Hamas leaders. So I'm presuming they would stay in power. Nothing would happen to them. And as we said, a lot of prisoners would be even released. I mean, some leaders, well, not leaders, but some senior officials of Hamas have been killed, but none of the actual masterminds behind October 7th or the leaders of Hamas, such as Ismail Haniyeh or Yahya Sinwar, all of them are still, or Mohammed Deif, all of them are still alive and would seemingly nothing would happen to them even if this deal falls through. So I don't see, in the similar way, I don't see any guarantee that October 7th wouldn't happen again, besides that they are weak now, but they will not be in 10, 15 years after they get the international rebuilding.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you said about the most generous way to take it, I think that's how they would like you to take it, and yet I don't think from their I don't see any reason to believe from their perspective that they're even convinced of that at all. That they would like the public to believe something like that, and yet not only do I think it's not true, I don't think they're convinced of that. I don't. It makes none of this makes any sense, and well, I don't want to just keep repeating myself, but this will be devastating for the Israelis, and Biden doesn't really care about that. Biden has his own narrow political interests in mind, and so this is not a just deal for anyone. Anyway, I'll leave it there.
So we have for tomorrow's studio, we have that episode about Israeli embassies in Mexico and Istanbul being set on fire, which we had to postpone a couple of times. But if we get more news about this deal, then we'll probably have to cover that. But if not, we'll talk about the Israeli embassies tomorrow. Morgan, what are we gonna talk about the reality show extra?
Oh yeah, so on the reality show extra, we're going to be talking about the post office scandal in the UK. Certainly everyone in the UK audience will know about that. If anyone outside the UK hasn't heard about that, this is what is actually the greatest miscarriage of justice in British history. That might sound a bit weird, given that it's concerning the post office, which is part of the reason why it was able to be perpetuated for so long. But we're going to be talking about that and all the little, you know, inroads into it. That it's gone on for over 20 years, and we're just seeing its resolution now. So join us for that. That's going to be really interesting. As well, the Reality Digest, the newsletter, is going to go out free again to people on the ARCUK UK newsletter. So if you go to the link in the description and you sign up, you'll get that from week after that. So the third edition is only going to go out to gold members. So subscribe, see what you can get, and then you're going to join us as a gold member, and then you'll get that delivered every week. And certainly this deal is, as we see it unfold and people react to it, is something that's going to be covered in this edition for this week. So make sure you sign up.
And with that, thank you everyone for watching. We'll be back tomorrow with the Daily Objective and the Reality Show Extra. Thank you, Morgan, and bye-bye.